authority of MGL 30CA 21A3, specific to the review of the executive session minutes for the meetings of 11/8/2021, 6/9/2022, 6/23/2022, and 7/21/2022, and then to reconvene back here.
So moved.
Okay.
Second. Oh.
Second. Okay. So we have a roll call. So
Yeah.
Yes.
Aye.
and I am also an aye, and we are in starting at 6:31. And who is taking minutes on that?
I think it's me.
Okay.
I think.
Are we good? Good evening and welcome to the Monday, August 8th, 2022 regular meeting of the school committee. We've just returned from executive session. I would invite those who are present to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So the first item we have on our agenda is public comment. I don't see people here for public comment, so we will move into recognitions. Do we have any recognitions? No. Okay. All right, then we can move into reports. Do you want to?
Sure. All right, so we'll start with the superintendent's report for August 8th, 2022. In this report, you will see an update on the designer selection for the Elmwood School project. I will update everyone on progress on the 3-year school district improvement plan, which the administrators will be working on shortly, and then just enrollment numbers as of today. So the Elmwood School project, we met with the MSBA on Tuesday, August 2nd, so just last week. And the Mass School Building Authority Designer Selection Panel, that they refer to as the DSP, interviewed the finalists for the Elmwood School project. And the following individuals were representing Hopkinton at the DSP. And so that was me and Mike Shepard and Tiffany Ostrander. And you know Mike Shepard and Tiffany are both part of the Elementary School Building Committee too. So in accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law, the DSP votes unanimously to rank the finalists in order of qualifications. And so I will tell you, it was a very close vote. All 3 of these providers were extremely qualified. But as it turns out, Perkins Eastman is the group that will be doing our work for us. So the MSBA determined that, or the design selection panel determined that Perkins Eastman possesses the requisite skills and experience for this project, particularly in light of their extensive experience in the design and construction of schools in Massachusetts. So we are very excited to actually have a designer on board now. I know we've been talking about this for a really long time. People I know in the community are wondering when they're going to start sort of being involved in some decision making. And I am hoping that we're going to be getting a contract with Perkins Eastman up and running very quickly, and then we can begin that work. This is really sort of governed, the work going forward is sort of driven a lot by Perkins Eastman as well as the Elementary School Building Committee, kind of working in partnership. All right, so the school district 3-year improvement plan next week on the 16th and 17th, which are Tuesday and Wednesday. The administrators have our 2-day retreat, and we'll be looking at the district improvement plans as well as their school improvement plans. So what we are focused on going into it are things like equity, enrollment growth, responsible budgeting, high quality teaching and learning, growing our social emotional learning, diversity, equity, inclusion, and culturally responsive practices, and then of course addressing individual student needs. We are up to a 25-member administrative team now with all of the additional personnel. And finally, enrollment numbers as of today. So you can see that the kindergarten class is up to 287. That's already a big class for kindergarten, which I'm sure Mrs. DeBow can agree to here. And then you can kind of see how many kids have come into a grade level and how many kids have exited a grade level. We have had 376 students come in, but we had a graduating class of 294. So our net gain right now, we're at 82 students, and we budgeted for 74. So we are not in bad shape in terms of we projected we would be and where we are. And then just one last piece I thought might be interesting to sort of show the community, and I'm not sure how well folks can see this at home, but this is changes in our enrollment and demographics between the years of 13-14 and 21-22. So in 13-14, our enrollment was 3,461, and today it's 4,006. Our enrollment by race and ethnicity, Asian students were, at that time, were 7.2% of the district, and today it's 26.4%. White students at that time were 88.3% of the district, and today it's 63.8% of the district. And of course, there are other demographics that fit in there, but I think that those were the most significant changes that we were seeing, so I highlighted them. Low income, we were at 2.4%, and today we are at 8%. English learners, we were at 1.2% of the district, and 3.3% of our kids had a first language that was not English. Today we have 7% of our district who are identified as English learners, and 19.1% of our kids have a first language other than English. Our high needs population, 16.9% of the district in 13-14, and today 28.6% of the district. And then just looking at MCAS in grade 4 ELA, and this was sort of just arbitrarily chosen. Our advanced and proficient numbers, 75% of all of our students scored in either the advanced or the proficient category, and in 21-22, 76% of all students were either meeting or exceeding expectations, and just the language change there was generated by DESE. 68% of those students were male, 70% of them were male in 2021, and in 13-14, 82% were female, and in 2021, 82% were female. So you don't see a whole lot of change there in terms of MCAS grade 4 ELA. I think where you will see changes, male-female changes, if you look at the graduates who are attending college or university in 13-14, 86.4% of the class of 2014 went off to college or university. 86.7% of them were females, 86.1% of them were males, and 85.4% of the class of 2021 went off to a four-year college or university. 87%, I shouldn't say of them, 87.7% of the females did, 81% of the males did. So you can see that the percentage of males has gone down from 13-14 to 21-22. So that might be something for us to look at. But I think what this really illustrates is that the Hopkinton Public Schools, even though our demographics have changed so markedly, I think that we are still maintaining some pretty high standards. When we look at our MCAS scores and when we look at our kids who are going off to college, and I will admit, looking at the drop between 86.1% and 81% of males, but overall it feels pretty good to still have some high numbers there.
And does the going to college, does that take into account like a gap year?
No, so what that will just show you is the guidance department's end of year report. And it's kind of interesting because certainly could have had a lot of kids who said I'm going to do a gap year, a lot of kids who said I'm just going to put off going because of the whole COVID issue, or maybe I'll decide to work a year or whatever. So yeah,
the percentages might be more equivalent than we think. We just can't project that
yes,
gap
that's
year.
right. It would be interesting to see what that looks like in the spring of 23.
Right. I'd be interested to know if it was part of a pattern, or if this was an outlier because of the pandemic, right? I don't know what would be impacting our boys over girls, but it seems like it could be a number that's not statistically significant in the long patterns, right?
I do think too, if we broke down our MCAS scores into advanced and proficient, you'd see a lot more girls in advanced than you would see boys.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm really thankful that you called out the gender breakout, because I think there are actually data points to watch along gender lines that show longer term trends. If in most of the data, a lot of the data is available on DESE website, not all of it, but it's good to sort of see what's happening over time.
Yeah. Okay, and that's all.
Questions? Okay, thank you.
Quick one today.
Good.
Thank you.
So that brings us into the school committee chair report. Payroll warrant S23002 has been approved. Operating warrants 23004 and 23005 have been approved. The copy of the warrants was in the packet. And then on July 21st, 2022, the executive session minutes from January 13th, 2022, April 6th, 2022, and May 12th, 2022 were approved but not released because the purposes of the executive session still exists. And that brings us into liaison reports. Does anybody have any liaison reports? Okay. Then that brings us into new business and starts us out with the special education 3-year presentation, which I know a lot of people have been looking forward to. You guys come on up and. Nice to see you both.
Thank you so much. Nice to see all of you as well.
And I'm just going to fix the table. Thanks for helping me.
All right.
So we can get started. Dr. Zaleski, Mrs. DeBow, and I had decided to sort of present all of this information to you jointly. And what you see on the screen right now is the title that says Special Education Staffing Proposed 3-Year Plan. And I think I want to point out before we even begin presenting that you are going to see proposed changes to staffing, but these changes are really in the best interest of our students. So really in the best interest of delivering specially designed instruction, easing transitions so that when our students on IEPs are leaving Marathon, for example, and going to Elmwood, or leaving Elmwood and going to Hopkins, there are people who know them so that when they arrive in the next school, placement works out so much better for the child because of our understanding of that child's learning profile and individual needs. And then the last part of this is really to have an autonomous preschool. You'll see in this presentation that when districts start to have a preschool the size of ours, you pretty much need to have a director, someone that is kind of running that entire program soup to nuts, so to speak. So why do we need a 3-year plan? It really is no secret that we have experienced incredible student enrollment growth, and I think you saw that on the last slide, that we've increased by about 500 kids in the last several years. So these increases in the number of students means that we have more students requiring specialized instruction, and we want our teachers to be exceptional at specially designed instruction. And we also have students who have different related services needs. And so for us to ensure the highest quality of teaching and learning for our kids, we hired some consultants to say, what is it that we could be doing better for students who are on IEPs, intensive and moderates. And so this presentation is really going to outline their recommendations. These are not things that Mrs. DeVoe or Dr. Zaleski or I thought up sort of in isolation, but we really had someone come in or a couple of consultants come in and do a really nice job of analyzing our programming.
So we put together this chart. So in student services, we collect ongoing data and we do a report at the year end, which is called, goes into the SIMS data, and it goes to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So this data that you see represents year end June data for over a 5-year time frame. So I just wanted to show this to you, and the next slide will break it down for you specifically by building what that looks like, but just to kind of give you a general overview as to where we're at as a district with our growth. And Ms. DeBoe is going to talk about the pre-K growth.
And when you, so just, I hope to develop an understanding of why preschool is called out so much and why it's so important. Of course, it's near and dear to my heart. But when we first began readying to move into Marathon, at that time we had 31 students on IEPs in our preschool program. So preschool is driven by special education needs. You partner them with community peers. So 31, wonderful, great. We can't wait to have you at Marathon with us. Well, we ended this past year with 50 students on IEPs, but it's not just 50. You have to count the community peers that come with them. So it's probably around 100 children that we didn't plan for at Marathon. When you think about the increase with special education, that's a 61% increase from when we were planning preschool to join us to where we are now. So that's a significant change. With that difference, those 19 students, it might not seem like a lot, but because of the requirements from the state for children with disabilities and without, to make sure you have that integrated aspect of it, we now will have 6 preschool classrooms. So we've added 3 additional classrooms, and that is significant. And also the state has their ratios with how many children should be in a class with special education needs and how many without. So it's not the same as our numbers in kindergarten, first grade, fourth grade, whatnot, because we're limited. 7 children with IEPs, 8 children with community peers for that 49-51% ratio. And I will share, there were some times this spring that we were out of that compliance. We didn't have space. Next year we're adding another preschool class. Like we didn't have anywhere to go. So when we talk about the needs for preschool later, that program has grown so much, it's comparable to programs that function separately because of the size of them. The enrollment story has also impacted preschool.
So when we look at this slide, I've broken it up by in-district and out-of-district, and just in terms of percentage increases. So again, over a 5-year time frame, we've increased by over 21% in the in-district. Out-of-district has remained relatively consistent with a little bit of fluctuation here and there, which is common depending on students moving in, moving out. But really, the in-district at this time is our primary focus in terms of our concern. And Dr. Kavanaugh is going to go through the breakdown with you. We set it up by building just so you can really see and get a clear understanding of what's happening.
Sure, and I won't go into too much depth building by building because you can really take a look at that slide. And as Mrs. DeBow said, she started out in FY18 with 31 students, and she's had an increase of 19 students over the last 5 years, bringing 31 to 50 students. But what you can see here is that if you were the team chair, for example, who covers Elmwood and Hopkins, that's that person's entire caseload. In FY18, that person had 107 students on her caseload. And so if you take a look today, she has 155 students on her caseload. And so it's a challenging time because that's when, we're doing a lot of initial evals and that person is getting to know families, and we want that person to be able to really be able to give a lot of attention to students and families. And when you start getting caseload numbers that are that high, it becomes more challenging to be able to do that, for example. I want to take a look at something like related services. So if you take a look at related services, which is the next to last row down, that stands for related services only. And it may appear to you, oh, look, there's a number that has gone down by 4. But that number hasn't gone down, actually. When you see RSO there, it refers to kids who only have a related service. So you may have lots of kids who are getting things like, speech or OT or PT, but those things are not onlys. They are embedded inside other IEPs, so that you might have a student at Marathon who gets some kind of academic support and speech and language. So that's not really a true number of the number of kids who are getting related services. It's kids who are getting related services only. I hope I've been clear about that, just so you can see what that is. Interestingly, as Dr. Zaleski just said, with the out-of-district, there's a very slim margin there. Last year we had our lowest number in 5 years at 26. This year we have our highest at 33. And 7 students in that increase is a lot of students, but you can see we've always fluctuated in that sort of similar neighborhood. But 103 students over 5 years is a lot when you take a look at this slide, which Dr. Zaleski will talk about, but we've got 14 chairs. So we've got 14 chairs and 103 additional kids for those folks to be able to kind of, pick up along the way.
Can I ask a quick question with
Sure.
the previous slide? Yeah. So we, during the pandemic, during one of our harder meetings, we discussed Hopkins and the fact that we had such an increase in Hopkins. And when you look at this, you really start to see, the transition into Hopkins seems to be when either kids are getting evaluated more, etc. So are we seeing a real need sort of in the Hopkins school kind of a bigger need there than in other places.
Yes, and what that number is letting us know that many kids are qualifying, but certainly Dr. Zaleski can talk to that.
Right, and I think it's a mixture of both. Right? At the elementary level, certainly you have more students that are qualifying, especially during the initials. By the time they're in the upper levels, there's an assumption, not always, but the students pretty much have an established IEP, have been determined in need of services early on and are receiving them. But at the elementary levels, and that's not to say at the upper levels you can't qualify and have an initial eval, certainly you can. But at the elementary level, you're definitely going to see more of an influx. And with our enrollment growth, we have absolutely seen that. And it's really impacted, and this is why this presentation is elementary K-5, pre-K 5 through 5, because across the grade spans, we're seeing a mixture of both. The increase in the service delivery needs, the profiles of the students have changed with the demographics, along with the number of students that have qualified.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So when we look at current non-student facing staffing, we worded it this way, and I'll define that for you. Non-student facing is positions that address specific administration duties that I'm responsible for, along with case management, which is what the team chairs are responsible for. And so, despite our growth, we have maintained these positions with having one person at high school, one person at middle school, and then the Hopkins Elmwood position has been divided in 2 buildings with one person doing all of those transitions and all of those meetings, and then one person at Marathon. And the Marathon person is also right now covering pre-K, so pre-K through 1. So with all that growth, it's just been a tremendous amount with no increase to our staffing in that regard.
And one of the things, too, that you should know is when we brought our consultant in, that person did an awful lot of work with our teachers and with our team chairs on specially designed instruction. And one of the things that we know about delivering professional learning to people is that unless we continue to revisit it as you go, what happens is people will sometimes regress, or new people come in and they're not familiar with the way we do specially designed instruction, so you can lose the momentum that you started.
Mm-hmm. So in looking at this slide, these are some proposed recommendations in our 3-year plan. So currently, again, we saw the staffing. I'm recommending that we put in a full-time pre-K director that's specifically going to manage those 6 classrooms and all the students, working with community partners, including early intervention, with a specific hyper-focus on pre-K. And then what I'm proposing is to restructure the current positions to become coordinator positions. And what that means is those positions will be administrative in nature. So these folks would have direct oversight of not only the case management, but also the supervision around the case management with liaisons to ensure that we're meeting all of our timelines and all of our needs are getting met. The other thing that's really important to mention with this potential restructuring effort is it's going to greatly assist with transition. So families, meet your coordinator, and when they're transitioning to the next building, oftentimes families have developed a very trusting relationship. They've shared a lot of personal details about their lives, about their children, about their disabilities, and it can be very difficult when you're transitioning from building to building to have to go through that again. And then also for the students too, we want to make sure it's just a smooth transition. So these positions not only help with the how we're restructuring the caseloads to service the grade spans, but it's really good for students. It just is. It's good for students and it's good for families. Oftentimes families call my office and they may know me because I'm involved in some of the cases, and they'll often ask, like, can I have the last team chair come? Can I have the last person come? Because I don't want to have to go through all this again. So this is just very good for students and very good for families. And then the additional position, so besides the restructuring, and within this restructuring, there's a new position. So if, when you think of the last slide has one person for Marathon and one person for Elmwood and Hopkins shared. So with this restructuring, this is an addition of a position. So you'd have a K2 person, a 3-5 position, and then the pre-K director. Also, I'm proposing a special education director of curriculum instruction and assessment K-5. So how this position differs from the coordinator position. So again, the coordinator position would be an administrator who's in charge of case management and have some evaluative responsibilities in that. But the director would be directly responsible for working in partnership with me and the building principals on specially designed instruction. That person would be in classrooms, would be overseeing the delivery of the instruction, looking at materials and resources, providing high-quality professional development, monitoring progress, keeping data on that, ensuring the students' needs are met in that regard. So that person I'm calling it a director because that person is different than the coordinator. It's more than case management. It really is all about curriculum instruction and assessment.
Just for clarification, the special ed coordinators are what we're looking at now as team chairs. It's restructuring it to be that position instead of the...
Correct, and thank you for asking that. Right, so we would no longer have team chair positions. These are administrators who are restructured to service these buildings in this capacity with evaluative responsibilities and responsibilities for, like I said, the transition and all of the IEP statutes that we have to abide by with timelines and regulatory obligations.
And that's really only K to 5
That's
at
K-
this point in time. So
that's-
6 to 12 would remain intact.
Yep,
I have another question.
sure.
So you were talking about continuity, and so staffing-wise, this totally makes sense because I can see how overloaded the person with Elmwood and Hopkins is. But at the same time, by separating the position, then the continuity does, I think, get a little harder, right? So how are you planning to handle that? Like, as a person who came from another school district and my kids were in special education, right? The coordinator knew my kids since first grade and knew them all the way till sixth grade. And so when things happened, they had, this viewpoint of it's a lot better than it was 3 years ago, right? And I assume right now with one coordinator across both buildings, you're sort of getting that, though they may be so overloaded that at this point they can't keep up.
So, all great points. And so let me address the first part, which is how will I manage the coordination of that? And I think, the restructuring of it is going to help with that continuity. So you'll have one person for the K2, which is key transitions from Marathon to Elmwood, and then one person from the grade 3 into the 5. So it just looks a little different. I think as far as the overall continuity ongoing, so much of what we do, we're an educational institute, is around curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Having this special education director, K5, is that person. Okay. That's going to be that key person that's going to be able to work with the families and work with the teachers and us on everything that's happened since your child's been in kindergarten and what's happening with progress and be able to answer those questions. And you use the term overloaded, but it does get tricky. Our team chairs do a fantastic job, evidenced by our recent, tiered focus monitoring review outcome. But it's getting tough, and families really deserve and need the time and attention to be able to answer these deep-rooted questions, and in those key transition times. So this will help. It really is. It's just so good for kids and so good for families.
And now where we currently have the shift, from 1 and then 2 to 3, you're leaving the building and you're also leaving all those familiar team members for your child. So now when children transition from first grade to second grade, they'll have that SPED coordinator that's still part of their team, because it is hard to sort of start anew with a whole new group, as Karen was talking about earlier. So now the intentional overlap, if you will, at the grade 2-3 building is you've got...
I see. Okay,
So that
makes
helps
sense.
with
Thank
that?
you.
Yes, okay.
That helps a lot. Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Just building on that, I love the overlap. I love that at providing that continuity across buildings. I think that's a huge positive aspect of this design. Did you talk at all about the Hopkins to middle school bridge?
Not yet, but you're going to see as we talk about later the focus.
Right.
Okay.
Great thinking, Amanda. So Dr. Kavanaugh, I didn't know if you wanted to speak about the budget piece.
I'll talk a little bit about the budget impact, because there's no real way to sugarcoat it. This is expensive. And we know that personnel makes up about 80% of any school budget, and what we're really looking at here are personnel costs, and probably all very high-end personnel costs. So in that first year, if we were to add 2 positions, one of them being the Special Education Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment K-5, and another one being an additional coordinator or sort of modified team chair position. The cost of that is about $210,000, and even though it's listed in that first column, that's not when you're going to feel the budget impact. So you can see that it says budget impact cost. Even though it's $210,000, that's for FY24, because if we are, our hope is to post these positions and get people in there this fall doing this work, but they would all be grant funded in the fall. And so what would end up is, so even though it's not part of the FY23 budget, it's still sort of supportable at this point in time. But when we get to FY24 in that second column, and Dr. Zaleski and Mrs. DeBow will talk a little bit about that right now, you're going to feel a huge impact because what is grant funded in 22-23 is going to become part of the operating budget in 23-24 alongside other positions. So it's a huge shift for us, and I think that it's going to really need the town to be able to financially embrace this. But I think it's the right thing for students instructionally in terms of an autonomous preschool and in terms of making transitions from building to building, which is a challenge in our district. We all know that.
So when you look at the middle column, 2023-24, part of our 3-year special education plan for the elementary school involves some staffing. I'll speak to that because it's all for Marathon right now. With our ever-increasing population, we talked a little bit about preschool. The recommendations from the work with consultants has been to increase some staff. And some of that is a 0.5 BCBA. That's a behavior support person for us. We currently have 1. Next year we will have 6 intensive classrooms at Marathon. We currently had 5. So the BCBA is very involved with those students. We also have students that are at a moderate level of special needs that benefit and require that behavior support, as well as non-special education children as we work on addressing through tiered focused monitoring and assessment and work with students. Sometimes that's short term, at our level that might be, a month or two, some work with the BCBA on a gen ed level, and then you're able to successfully navigate challenges as we build up those skills. So a recommendation is a 0.5 BCBA because that person could then focus on, preschool. There we go. Another recommendation is a 0.5 special education liaison. When we have currently have 3 moderate learning specialists at Marathon at the K1 level. We now have 27 classrooms. So as our 3, and the teachers are the ones that they're developing the plans. They're responsible for the plans. As we are working on incorporating some co-taught classrooms, not from the start of the bell to the end of the bell, but subject specific, going in to work with the general education teacher to teach math, to teach literacy. Children join over the course of the year, we never close, as well as disabilities come about at different times of the year. That would enable us to better support children throughout all the grades because they're not necessarily placed at the get-go in certain classes. So that would help us better support children across the grade level with a 0.5 liaison. And another ask there, the last one, or 3B paraprofessionals. In our district, we categorize our paraprofessionals. B is the special education paraprofessional. So we have general education, the A, B is special education, C is the ABA paraprofessional. Thinking about the co-taught model, thinking about students that are in different classes, it provides more flexibility to meet student needs where they are, because that's a lot of ground to cover when you think about those classrooms. So those recommendations are for the elementary level. Now, something you mentioned, Amanda, what about those upper levels? So the work with the consultants that we've worked on for the past few years focused on the elementary level. And once a needs assessment, and Dr. Zaleski will speak to this more, it'll address that.
Sure, thank you. So in grades 6 through 12, we've done a lot of work with consultants in the intensive population. And for the past few years, three years now, ending I think mid last year we ended it. But the consultant came in, worked with our intensive special needs teachers, and really worked to push the inclusive opportunities to learn and looked at the instruction. And so we were doing that work in part, coinciding with this work at the elementary level. And so now the goal is, after we secure this restructuring, is to do that second layer to the secondary level, which is looking at the moderate special needs students. Similar to what we did, of course it'll look a little different, but similar in the sense of looking at the curriculum, instruction, assessment, how we're delivering services, and conducting an assessment to see what the needs are and if we need to be doing anything differently and what that would look like. So that would be a proposed goal for 2023-2024. And I would look to secure funding through my grants for that. That's typically how I fund the consultants, is within the grants. This is great too because it also satisfies the tiered focused monitoring requirement to have annual program reviews of our programming. So this would be helpful to that as well. So that would help bridge the gap too. Like I said, we've done a lot of work with the intensive population, but it would bridge the gap with the work grades 5 to 6, and then 8th to 9th in high school.
So just to clarify, as I think I understand it, the positions in the 23-24 school year were also recommendations from the consultant that you
Yes.
had. And those are, you said, focused pretty much on marathon? Are they all even the 3B paraprofessionals, are those also
Yes.
marathon? So I guess I just, I'm wondering, Hopkins, and it's seeing like the 58% growth over in the population for special ed over these years. It's similar to the pre-K 61%. How are we feeling about Hopkins?
Well, if you recall, we added a special education instructor to Hopkins. I came before school committee and we asked for that to address that need. So Ms. Bolello has done a fantastic job, and she's not here tonight, but did a fantastic job really gathering data and looking at the needs for the instruction at her level. And we did have the opportunity to have a conversation with the consultants when we were doing this work, thinking about Hopkins in mind. And Ms. Bolello and I made the determination with Dr. Kavanaugh's support to put in that additional instructor to meet the need at Hopkins, to make sure that we were providing, same high quality service in light of the growth, and then Ms. Bolello in partnership with Ms. Carver along with Mr. Bowe was instrumental in looking at this plan as well with us and making some determinations about what made sense, because Ms. Bolello shares the position right now with Elmwood for the team chair. And when we looked at this proposed model, garnered the support, like I said, of all the elementary principals to make this effective. Okay. And so that's how we're going to meet the need, along with that increased position, because we didn't forget about Hopkins. Yeah. As a matter of fact, we were feeling it mid-year, which is why we came before school committee.
Thank you.
So again, the budget impact in 23-24 to hire what is essentially a 1.0 FTE. If you add the 0.5 BCBA and the 0.5 special education liaison, you've got a 1.0 FTE, and we can estimate the cost of that to be about $100,000. That may be a little bit high, but that's what we put it in there as. 3B paras at $100,000. So now what you're really talking about when you add column 1 and column 2 is $410,000, and that's in a single year's FY24 operating budget increase. That gets you close to 1% really of an increase going from FY23 to FY24, which is why we're showing you this now, because we want you to know that we're being thoughtful about it, but this is expensive.
So that leads me actually to a question that was popping in my head as I was looking at this, which is, we're sort of doing this as quickly as we can to meet the need at Marathon, but the need at Marathon moves up, right? Mm-hmm. So whatever need we see at Marathon is going to go up Elmwood, it's going to go to Hopkins, it's going to, so can we start thinking 5 years, 6 years in terms of, we may need the 3B paras or, whatever at Hopkins.
And I like your thinking, if I may respond. I like your thinking. So in one of our slides, we talk about later on that this need addresses what we've been doing for the past 2 years with the consultants and recommendations, also to address the growth. But this certainly does not, in full transparency, speak to continued growing needs as we look across the grade spans and we continue to experience that growth. For sure. So, and that's why, Dr. Kavanaugh, when she says this is expensive and it's almost 1% of the budget, but it also doesn't figure in future potential positions we may need.
And that's why I'm asking now, because the 410K is definitely going to be hard to, swallow, to have the community back, to, discuss. And so if we can think a little further ahead and maybe split up the costs a little bit and start bringing in people in smaller chunks, I guess, through that period, then we won't see hopefully that big budget impact, in the coming year.
Yeah, it will be important to watch the numbers of students that we have on IEPs who are leaving Marathon and going to Elmwood. And are those numbers comparable to the students who are at Elmwood today, or is that going to drive the numbers up at Elmwood as well?
Yeah.
I also wonder, I know we had talked at an earlier point when you were at a different meeting about some of the impact of the pandemic and how that has affected some of the needs that kids have. I guess it's really impossible to know how that will continue to trickle up through the grade span.
It is tricky to know. I mean, certainly we saw the impact of the pandemic on all of the students, which was inevitable, and we've done our best to address it with, again, bringing in consultants and diligently collecting data and progress monitoring and working with the families and the team. And I think, when we think proactively, we want to always have in mind that there is an impact, and the trauma of that impact doesn't go away overnight, right? It just doesn't. And so when you take the impact of that along with, good consultancy recommendations, boots on the ground recommendations based on what we were seeing in classrooms and day-to-day operations, and then keeping future growth in mind, it's really a triangulated situation for us to assess and to continue to make recommendations. And it's always at the forefront of our mind. And so, like I said, it wouldn't be isolated to specific pandemic, whereas earlier on we were asking for some things we were really worried. And we continue to be worried, but we have to think, again, with that triangulated model in mind of other factors as we're growing. And also demographics are changing, and student profiles are changing too. The needs of the students coming in. When Dr. Kavanaugh spoke about related services, before sometimes you'd have students with just speech, but now the students are coming in, and especially at the lower levels, at Mr. Bowe's level, and they're so complex, and they have so many needs that we're embedding them throughout the whole IEP process with OT, PT, speech, full day preschool. I mean, there's a lot. So there's a lot to think about.
With preschool, we definitely saw an impact due to the pandemic, but you have to factor in the growth that the town is experiencing. So it's not just the pandemic, because you see the overall district population. So it's little people too, as well as older people.
If you just look at the percentage, because I did this because I was curious about that, and so like in 2018, it was 13.7% of the population was on IEP. 2019 it was 13.4, 2020 13.2, 2021 13.8, 2022 14.6. So the numbers have grown quite a bit. We're at 586 now students. So one of the questions I asked Dr. Kavanaugh was, my expectation would be that at a minimum, a bare minimum, because the needs have also diversified, at a minimum, I would like to have seen your budget grow proportionate to the district budget, because your population has grown proportionate to the population. Because you are so resourceful, and so many of your asks come forward with, it's grant funded, or I could do that. Like there are so many other funding sources for special ed, for paras here, and it's really hard to put the numbers together to actually verify that we have been supporting your growth in budget the way we should have. And so I feel remiss in that, because I've been sitting in this chair, and I probably should have asked this question before, but I think it's important to think about, this is an area that needs actual budget investment and not just grant funding, because even if we just continue to keep it like the 13-14%, with the diversification of needs and the growing population overall, those head counts are growing. Right. So I really appreciate the thought you've put into this, and that we'll continue to put in for the upper grades. I think it's really important.
Also, just to piggyback off of that, your ability to find grants for things has served us so well and is really remarkable. I love that you're able to bring this forward and to implement the need now with grant funding, where we don't have the ability to kind of go back and say, actually, we need more money.
Thank you.
I have a little question about the third column, because I know that at a previous visit, I believe we talked about the 18 to 22 program, and with the addition of the business, which provides life skills and, phenomenal opportunities for these students, it requires the staff to then manage a business and manage teaching. And are we comfortable waiting until 24, 25 to bolster that staffing for that program?
Yes, the answer right now is yes. So we have manageable numbers, as you heard in my previous presentation, and we're working to grow and offer our program to other districts if they're interested. And, we're not there yet, but we're getting there. And we did have our site visit, and it went very well, so we're waiting to hear on that decision. But I do believe we'll be okay, because this year will be the year of, continuing to grow our business, continuing to work with other programs, continuing to provide the students with ample opportunities to learn and transition. And as we work to grow that, and again, expand upon inviting other students in, and this is why in this slide it says transition specialist based on enrollment. It is our hope, like I said, that students would join the program, and if they do, the vision would be that the transition specialist will really have a focus, a licensed person with a focus on helping those students with post-secondary opportunities as they prepare to age out through 22 years old, but to have in-town opportunities and to make those connections with peers and find their niche, which is why we call our business Finding Your Niche with the Hopkinton shop. But it goes beyond that. It's really about those community connections, and it's about bringing students in and expanding upon that. And if we are able to grow it in that fashion, I would separate it where we would have our current 18 to 22 coordinator continuing to oversee the IEP process and making sure the students' goals are met in the area of transition, but that this person would be very focused on those community partnerships and connections and making sure when those students age out to 22 years old that they have meaningful opportunities, potential meaningful employment, and maybe even within our own district. I would love that. Like, that would be just fantastic. So we have a lot of vision, but I don't think we're there yet. And also in being, fiscally minded and responsible, these other priorities are really at the forefront right now with the elementary level. Whereas this is certainly a priority with the 18 to 22, but we've done so much with it and we continue to do so well with it, I believe we're okay for now. And so the budget impact, I don't know, Dr. Kavanaugh, if you want to speak about that with the transition.
Oh, yes, sorry. So in 24-25, if you were only adding the transition specialist to the 18 to 22 program, the budget impact there for FY25 is about $75,000.
It would seem like a safe assumption with the growth of the district between now and 2 years from now, though, that we might have other enrollment-related needs in the special ed department.
Yes. I know part of me does worry a little bit because I do think that, as we've always looked at our enrollment growth, we kind of want to make sure the kids are there before we ask for something, financially from the town. But I think that this is showing us the kids are here.
Yeah.
You've waited.
Yeah.
And it was, you were talking about percentages, I was looking at the actual numbers as opposed to the percentages, which maybe makes more sense, but I mean, it was 30 to 40 kids per grade. Now it's 40 to 50 kids per grade. So where's the tipping point? And I feel like if you look at these 5 years, you've hit the tipping point.
Thank you.
So it's a tough sell, but it's a very realistic need as evidenced by the numbers. So if we have another tipping point where then it goes to 50 to 60 kids per grade because the enrollment has increased enough, then you got to think about where's your next tipping point, right? And
Right.
It's hard to anticipate that. You don't know, but
Right, we want to be as proactive and not reactive as possible. That
Right.
really is the goal, and I appreciate you, acknowledging the grant opportunity, but we're stretching the grants as much as we can and writing them and finding them as much as I can, but to the tipping point factor, we just really need to be proactive. I don't want to be in a situation where funding may not come in and we have all of these needs, and that's why we put together this presentation too.
Yep.
So we titled this slide Eventual Non-Student Facing Staffing. So with this plan, we're really going from 5 to 7 positions. So it's really an ask of 2 new positions. because we have those existing positions in the budget. So we've highlighted in a little different color the 3 to 5 coordinator, the K2 coordinator, the preschool director, and then the special education director of curriculum instruction and assessment. And again, I just can't say enough that it is just, although it's non-student facing, it is good for students, it is good for families, it is good for the transitions, and overall, it's good for student outcomes. Because with those type of smooth transitions, you are creating the opportunity for independence, autonomy, especially with the pre-K, to operate as a fully functioning pre-K program with all of the enrollment, assisting with academically and socially sound transitions, helping the families, being able to better meet the needs, having this additional person. And it's, like I said, less about the caseload and more about student service delivery. And that's why we're here, is the student service delivery and the families.
And these positions would help those that are facing students be able to do their job better than they are. Perhaps we have fabulous, high-quality staff, but they're working really hard. They're very busy, and while these positions are non-student facing, their roles would be able to help those people, which then in turn helps the children.
How many are there now? 5?
There's 5, right? So 14 chairs and myself, and then this would be 7. So in the reporting structure, I'm the director of student services, and right now the team chairs currently report to me. So we would keep the reporting structure similar. The coordinators would report to me, and we would also have the luxury of the special education curriculum instruction assessment person working in partnership with me, but also building principles, which is just so critical with assessing that data and dealing with the instruction and being in classrooms. Because with this growth, and Mr. Bowe can speak to this because she's the only principal here tonight, but it would be a great help.
Well, I think this is a collaborative approach to address student changing needs. No one person can do it all, and it pains me to say that because I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. I can't do it as well as if I had great supports with me, and that's what this would do. So while these are non-student facing changes here, overall in terms of the impact, we should have great return for the students' growth and development when we are able to best support our teachers and our professional staff that are in those roles.
And 2 positions for an additional 103 kids is not an unrealistic ask, I don't think, in order to manage an additional 103 cases.
I love the preschool director position. I mean, we don't have any control. I mean, it is what it is, and the students are very welcome when we need to be prepared to serve them. So I love that will be a focused position for that very large population.
And that is such a key role because that is often families' first introduction to the district. It's a time when parents may not recognize their child has a disability, or they're worried that they do. So having that start off on a positive note benefits us through their career in the school. It's a nice relationship to establish. So there's a lot of time spent with that. Intake meetings, evaluations, coordinating that, because you need parents to feel good when they send their young children off to school or when they send their child to school for an evaluation. That's a really big word, and some of these children are that high, so that's a little scary for families. So having someone in that role who is able to develop those relationships actually contributes to greater positive relationships for many years to come. So that is it's a key role. And what's good to know is not all of our evaluations result in an educational plan, but we want to leave with positive parent relationships regardless, because they'll be with us someday, even if they don't have a need to be with us right now.
This is somewhat related, but a little bit off topic, but looking at the numbers in the preschool and the growth in looking at how we're bringing in community kids as well to keep our ratios right reminds me of the need for space at Marathon.
Yes. Yes. So our next preschool class will be in the family resource room this year. So we don't have any other space on the first floor for them. And the reason why you put a first grade or a kindergarten there, those classes are higher numbers. So while preschool has that ratio, we shouldn't have more than 15. So that's better than having a class of 22 in that small space that's not meant to be a classroom. So that part's tricky because we're at the point where deciding, okay, how would this go? And they also need proximity to a bathroom, and there is a bathroom right there in the library.
I know that you have a strong history of making needs in a building that doesn't have enough space back to center school.
Make
but
it work.
My hope is that we are able to come back after the August 18th special town meeting and be able to move forward with the addition.
That would be fantastic.
Not to
Yes,
slide
I
that
agree.
in as advertising.
I know. So if you want to know more, check out the website on the town. It'll tell you all about that warrant article. Mhm.
So, one question that may be a little tangential, I don't know. As a special education coordinator across the school district, do you find that there is more money spent in the younger grades? Like when I, once again, thinking of my kids, right? The amount of social skills class, groups that they had, and the OTs and the whatever that slowly kind of phased out as they got older. So I was just wondering, do you find that there's kind of this front-loaded, younger cost in special education that maybe gets lesser as kids move through?
Yes and no.
Okay.
That's the real answer. So yes, it's absolutely front-loaded because as we're presenting tonight, the youngest learners are are very needy and they're new to the district, and we spend a lot of time and attention providing services and supports, especially to make sure that we're addressing the disability-related need to prevent future difficulties as they grow. However, that's not to say at the upper levels, certainly you can have students that move in that perhaps were unidentified or that are identified but that have growing needs as time has progressed. Also, family situations and psychosocial stresses are contributing factors to that, and to the student needs. I just feel like it looks different at the upper levels. At the upper levels, we provide heavy social emotional support. Sometimes there are needs that were not initially addressed when they were younger for whatever reason or another, it looks differently. And then we also have the out-of-district needs. So when you balance the student service budget, when I think of all of my costs and looking at student service delivery, it's distributed, I won't say equally, but differently, depending on the need and the age of the students and disability and the grade levels.
And as children get older, and feel free to correct me because I'm out of my lane here, we are teaching them skills and strategies. As children age, they're able to apply them with greater independence. So, and that's the goal. We're trying to build up independence so that what they're, building in occupational therapy sessions, physical therapy, and speech and language, children are then able to apply those independently. At our level, they're not.
Yeah.
They need our help
And that's-
to build and grow those skills.
No, and I think that's a great,
Doesn't mean they don't need any direct support, but it might be a little less.
and that's why we have programs like our
Yeah.
18 to 22 program and transition support in the high school, and that's why we have that, because we build the foundation, but at the upper levels, again, the needs look different, because parents at those levels are worried about, what's my child going to do? Where are they going to go? Are they going to go to college? Or are they going to have a vocation? Are we going to give them the necessary life skills to be able to function independently? And those, have a cost impact as well with student service delivery. We just want to make sure all the students are getting what they need to be successful in life.
Thank you.
All right, so we're nearing the end. As Leah, you had asked earlier, but these projected costs really only address the recommendations that have come from our consultants. They do not, at this point in time, address future growth. We do anticipate that there will be need for additional positions based on enrollment. And I think we're always, pretty carefully watching the numbers. And that's where we'll leave you.
This is a phenomenal presentation, and I'm so
Thank you.
grateful that we have this opportunity to look at what we're going to be needing to ask for from the town, not this year, but for the following year in the budget. So that's a great help in us, our ability to market that, so to speak, in our budget.
Thank you.
So
Appreciate
planning
you
ahead
listening.
is key. I think we've gotten to the point that we've got to look ahead to plan so we can continue that high level that Dr. Kavanaugh shared with our scores and everything that we've been doing. As someone pointed out, we've done a lot with what we've had and we're very resourceful, but we're at the point we've got a plan to make sure that we're able to maintain that.
And to be proactive.
Yes.
It's not always easy when you're trying to make progress, but No pain, no gain. What did I say?
Well, I would like to thank Dr. Zaleski and Mrs. DeBell, but also Mrs. Carver and Mrs. Bolello, because as Dr. Zaleski said, there were several days that we were hunkered down at the Marathon School having these conversations about everything that you see in this presentation tonight, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
And the principals who can't be here tonight, so, because they worked hard with us this summer to put this together too.
And they're conveniently on vacation tonight.
They didn't bring us.
That's great. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you.
No,
It's
thank you
also
very much.
a great point to highlight how hard, I know all of the administrators are working this summer while some of us are enjoying more time off than others, that I hope you guys are all getting some time for
Thank you.
yourselves and your families.
Yes,
Thank
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Yes, take care.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
That brings us into item B, which is the Marathon General Contractor bid action.
Thank you. And I'll just read the memo that's in here, so I think it's easier for the listening audience to understand. But the general contractor bid from Mill City for the classroom edition for Marathon, which you've heard is so needed, was accepted during the school committee meeting on July 21st. The bid amount that was in the school committee packet of $3,721,149 was an error. So during the bid process, all of the sub-bids are bid first, and then those numbers are given to the general contractor, and they're folded up into that number. The electrical bid, that was received back, and some of the questions that were asked, it was clear there must have been some ambiguity in the bid that went out. So they pulled that number from the GC number, and that's the number that came to you, the school committee, at that last meeting. But since then, the electrical sub-bid was refiled, and the number folded back in. So the correct number for Mill City, which is again inclusive of all the sub-bids, is $3,992,152. And this is the correct number that was carried in the budget when we were presenting and looking for that additional money. It was just that letter that was in the packet the last meeting that had the incorrect number.
So it's more just a paper fixing that
Correct.
in reality, everything is on target for the special town meeting and the $850,000.
Correct.
Yes, it doesn't impact the $850,000.
Right.
Do you want a motion?
I would love a motion.
I move to accept the correct bid amount of $3,992,152 from Mill City for the Marathon Edition pending funding.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so a motion by Amanda, a second by Holly. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that is unanimous. Thank you very much for bringing that back.
Thank you.
And that brings us into item C, which is the district financial assistance. Dr. Kavanaugh.
Sure, well, thank you. We have, I think, frequently had conversations about, several fees that go along with being a student in the Hopkinton Public Schools and how families are able or struggle to pay those fees. And we want all of our kids to be able to access all of our offerings. As you know, the school committee has a policy, JLB, that addresses that issue. And we have thought hard about whether or not we are doing enough to support our kids who need financial assistance. So our policy does say fee waivers are available to families earning less than 1 1/2 times, 150%, the federal poverty guideline, and fee reductions are available to families earning less than 2 times, or 200%, the federal policy guideline. And fees include things like transportation, athletics, parking, pre-K tuitions, those sorts of things. So what does it actually mean to live in Hopkinton? Because we can look at the federal policy, and then when we take a look at that sort of side by side with Hopkinton, we say, my gosh, it's a very expensive place to live. So in Massachusetts, Hopkinton is ranked 7th out of 273 cities in the United States, and Hopkinton is estimated to be about 150.3% of the national average, making it one of the most expensive cities in the United States. Our median household income is $112,000, $12,014, and our median individual income is $50,515. So what did we see in the 21-22 school year? We received 57 fee waiver applications. And 50 of those were approved at 100%, 3 of them were approved at 50%, and 4 of them were denied. And that's based, again, on the 150% and 200% metrics. So if you look at what the fee structure is for the Hopkinton Public Schools for 2022, you can see in that left-hand column, they look at the household size. So how many people are living in that household, and what does the federal poverty guideline say for a single person? And then if we looked at what 150% of that is, and would your income be less than that amount? And then that would give you the removal of those fees. And if you were a person who was at less than 200% of that federal poverty guideline, you were at less than 200%, that would get you a reduced fee. And so when you take a look at these numbers up against the numbers that we just talked about, like what is the, go back to it, median household income and the median individual income. An individual income median is at $50,000, and then you can kind of take a look at what the federal poverty guideline says for a single person, and what would get someone in Hopkinton free fees or reduced fees. This is very, very low compared to that $50,000. One of the things that we know is that school lunches were free for all of our kids in the 21-22 school year, and they will be free again for every single student in 22-23. And school lunch is obviously something that our kids are paying for every single day, so it's a big cost for students. So I think at this time we really do, we may want to take a very sort of deep look at where we are in terms of our financial support for our kids and our families. And so I think you have some options tonight, and this is an opportunity for the committee to dialogue about it. But you really could take policy JLB and just hand it to the policy working group, the 2 members of this committee and myself, and you could say, take a look at this thing and see if you think that we're doing all right with 150% and 200%, if you think that we need to change something, if you think that there are other policies out there that we could model ours after. Or we could say, maybe the policy subcommittee doesn't really need to look at this, and maybe school committee members really feel like this is something you feel so strongly about that we could bring it back in a couple of weeks and you could have dialogue about this in open session. Or maybe you feel like tonight you could have an immediate discussion and entertain a motion, which I think would be pretty quick, but I think those are kind of your options for tonight. And, I would invite you to have conversations about where you would like for us as a district to kind of take this, and you as a committee.
So I have very strong feelings about this sort of thing.
I do as well.
I had a friend who was at poverty line, and it's not school fees, but it's just kind of this gradation problem, right? So the federal or state support would cover like daycare for her children. But if she earned 50 cents more, she would lose the entirety of the daycare for her children, right? So 50 cents more would lose her however many thousands of dollars of support she was getting. And so this kind of thing feels like that as well, right? So if I'm at 150% and I get my dollar raise, now suddenly every school fee that I was able to get a waiver for, I can no longer get a waiver for. So I get 50% or whatever, but it's gradation-wise, right? It's a pretty extreme jump. And so I'm not saying it can be solved tonight, but if we hand it to the policy working group, I would really appreciate that kind of thought being put into it. Like, how extreme does this feel for somebody who was at 150 and is now maybe having to hold themselves back, not because of the fees, because of everything, right? From getting a raise, because things just disappear on them. Right.
And I think too that we, we don't really know what that threshold is because we're not familiar with people's incomes. So imagine we raise that threshold a little bit. I think we also have to say, as a district, what can we afford? So
Right.
maybe a piloting year to look at something makes sense.
I would also kind of question when we look at how many applications we had versus how many we accepted and the 4 that we denied. We don't know how many people didn't apply because they knew they didn't meet the federal poverty guidelines for that. And there's the one piece of the families that are struggling that need busing because the parents have to get to work and they need the kids at the bus stop. They work whatever shift, and kids that want to go to nature's classroom that don't have the resources for that, and all the other things that cost a little bit, in some cases a lot extra. And in many cases, the very difficult piece for a parent to have to be able to either kind of reach out to the district and knowing that they might get denied, that difficult piece. But then if they do get denied, having to share with their child. We can't do that, and how painful that is for kids. And when we want to have kids being able to meet the educational piece, if they're not getting those needs met, to kind of at least feel safe emotionally with their peers, it's more challenging to learn. So I would love to be able to look at a way that we could help our families and our kids to be able to access things more easily. But also when I think of things like our bus fees and the traffic issues that we have in town, if we could encourage people by making it more affordable for families that are struggling even a little bit, I think that would also help us. So I would love to look at what we're able to afford to be able to increase assistance.
I would like to be a part of whatever discussion is had about this. It's obviously something I feel very strongly about. I did a lot of work in other communities that aren't as affluent as ours, and I understand from a student perspective, being a socioeconomically lower on the chain than other kids, and it's already probably pretty obvious and probably already subjects these kids to some bullying, right? And then you have these kids that make like 200% of the federal poverty guideline for a family of 4 is $55,000. The median rent in this town is about $2,500. So that's about $30,000 a year for a whole family just to pay for their housing, with it $20,000 left, which we know living in this state doesn't really do very much for anybody. So I would say that I would love to try to find a different way of calculating this number, just because we're focusing on equity and we're focusing on inclusion, and that is one of the first steps to get there, is making sure that anybody's financial situation isn't a barrier to have the same experience as everybody else, right? And I'm very interested in the people that were denied. Was it just because they were slightly over the federal poverty line, or because they were trying to access something that clearly they didn't understand, or what? There's probably a lot of reasons. But even sometimes, wealthy people have not wealthy, but like middle class folks have a lot of debt that maybe they can't invest in their kids. It's not the kids' fault. So I was hoping that we could kind of think of this more in the people that we have living in this town and how the socioeconomic diversity has increased, so we can make sure that, our kids aren't othered by a policy that we have,
Yeah, and I'm certainly not discounting need, but I will say that our building principals are really good at being
Yeah.
able to identify kids who need a little bit of help, so that, if we have a sense that someone's struggling for a field trip or struggling with, something else, we can help to fund that at the building level.
Yeah.
They're very much aware of their families.
Yeah.
I would wonder, and I love the idea of a pilot, but if we could also make it more accessible for parents to be able to, I know like we had the Lunch Heroes program where there were parents that were actually not aware that there was that challenge, and then we started having people trying to help out other students. But if we could make a box to check on field trip forms, or a box to check on wherever we're getting fees, if you want to contribute a little bit more, even if we only got a few dollars per so many kids, it would help, so that principals maybe don't have to take from other places to get the field trips, they've got more money in the budget for other things, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
So I, okay.
No, go.
I'm 100% behind this topic. I think we've been talking about this for a while, so I'm really happy to see this here. So I guess I'm of two minds about the road forward. I 100% think that piloting a change for a year is an important step because we don't have a good sense of need, or so I really like the pilot idea. I also really like the idea of going deeply into policy JLB, but I'm also cognizant of the start of the school year on the horizon, which is why it was important to talk about this now, like before the school year starts. So part of me is I wouldn't want to do anything tonight, but we have another meeting before school starts. And I'm wondering if we can consider an incremental step that is an improvement while there's a more in-depth review of the policy and our approach, so that we can put something in place for this school year and then sort of see how that plays out. Well, because I have a feeling, based on the comments of the committee, that it's going to take some iterations and some time to do the policy in full, in a way that works and everyone's comfortable with. But I don't know that I want to hold up an incremental improvement while waiting for perfection. You know what I mean?
Right.
So-
I don't think you'll ever get a perfect, because there's always going to be a cutoff where a family might say, oh, if I was just $100 less, I could be in there, and it could be a very genuine need.
And it's always a concern too, like if your last year's tax forms look solid, but you lost your job in February.
That should be taken into account.
Like how does that,
Yeah.
we have to work with the district and with Susan to really understand how we handle that, because I don't think, we set the policy, but we really don't know how it actually works.
Yeah, right.
I would wonder if we're looking to put not, again, I agree with you, not tonight, but in 2 weeks when we meet again to look at doing a pilot, if we might be better off suspending the JLB discussion until we've had some data from the pilot to kind of look at so that we don't have to keep kind of guessing at it now, and maybe instead of put something in that's kind of like we did, I hate to look back to masking, but how we retired the policy temporarily, or it ended up being permanently, and we had something else in place of for pilots.
I like that idea, to base policy on data. That's always going to be my vote, right?
So the real question when we come back in 2 weeks then is, what are the parameters of a pilot that makes sense, right? Is it increasing the 2 levels by some percentage to cover, maybe X amount more people, and then see how much that would cost, right? Is it a slight increase in a gradation of the percentages? Is it what are the possibilities for a reasonable pilot for the coming year that would give us information that we could then use to determine the policy changes, right?
We could research that. What are other similar communities doing, or what are other communities doing that have the kind of growing socioeconomic diversity that we have? How are they addressing it? Has it been working? We could talk to, Holliston's a similar town. We talk to Ashland. We talk to, Wellesley, all these other communities in Massachusetts that has a similar cost of living. We're one of the more expensive states to live in, unfortunately.
Just
Right.
calling out Lexington,
Yeah.
looking at Lexington just as a for instance. They up to 200%. There's no program fees or anything. Active military are also a separate category.
That's interesting.
201 to 300% is you pay 25% of the program fee, and then 301 to 350% you pay 50% of the program fee.
So it's a gradation.
So it's a different gradation. They add in a military, and it's also expanding the coverage. That's just one example. I mean, there are lots out there, but I think I think those things for me would be in the 4 corners, as they tell me, of a pilot.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. The military is really interesting.
I like that.
Yeah.
And what kind of data would we collect to ensure that this pilot is a success versus, because would we how would you collect the data to say at the end of the year or at the end of 6 months or however long you want to give it to say, yes, if this works, we feel good about this? Is it the percentage of children that are covered? Is it ensuring that these families that want to be a part of it are captured within our pilot metrics? Or like, how will we consider this? What would you consider a success, Amanda? So I know you like the I'm sorry. I don't mean to call out you specifically, but just because you like the gradient idea, and I think that's a good idea, but what would you consider success?
I don't have an answer for you, but I do think that it might make sense, because I was on vacation, so I haven't had to think deeply, but I do think if the policy working group can like take this input, kind of get into the deeper discussion. I think we're meeting Monday morning. Talk about what a pilot might look like and how we would measure it, and then bring it back.
Yeah.
I think more heads together,
Right.
kind of taking this on and thinking over coffee.
I think, one of the things that I think is going to be hard is right now, we don't know the percentage of families that have need that are not covered.
That's right.
Sorry. So it's hard to know who we are now covering with our pilot that needed it. Like, it's really hard to determine, like, what percentage of the people who are in need, who we were not covering before, have we actually managed to kind of put under this new umbrella.
Is the free lunch program, I know we have free lunch for everybody, is the free lunch program a similar setup where 200% of the federal poverty level to access free lunches in school, or is there a different metric that covers that?
So it's all the different agencies, if you will. If you are on SNAP benefits or, any of those agencies that are giving assistance to families, which all have their own requirements as to how you qualify. All of those families go into a database, and we're fed the family names that qualify.
Yep.
So we don't have exactly what the metrics are behind every program.
That's interesting.
Mass health,
Yeah.
all those things, all can get you to qualify for free lunch.
Right, because I think that would be a good, like, kind of, not the list of actual people, but the number of families would be a good thing to start from, like, make sure we're covering all of those families at a minimum, and then elevating it from there, right? Because that would be a good way to, because you have a number to start with, like a baseline.
The other piece of data that we don't have, the piece we don't have is that we don't know how many more people changing the threshold is going to bring in and what the cost is going to be to the district. And that might be data that goes into forming the policy.
Yeah.
Do we find that we could have made it so more people could come in? Do we find that we're then struggling in other areas of our budget?
Yeah, that's a good.
Are there any trends from previous years available? How many folks, I guess it's a unique year given the circumstances, but how many folks did apply for the fee reductions on either transportation or field trips or any of that? I feel like that might be helpful too.
So I can tell you that.
You can. All right. Thanks. Thanks.
So in the 1920 school year, there were 96 students, which represented 64 families. In the 2021, there were 59, which represented 31 families. And for 21-22, there were 71, which represented 41 families.
So it's like kind of like
So
this.
Yeah.
It's impossible to look
Yeah,
at.
so
Was that
No
for free
pattern
lunch?
at all.
What was it?
this is financial assistance.
Financial assistance.
Yeah.
It's not going to help our analysis, but I think it's important to look at it and see,
But
and how many of those folks qualified versus how many applied, to see if we can find something that will help.
There are very few, like each year, there's maybe 1 or 2 families that don't qualify. And I will say that when they don't qualify, they
They're close.
really don't qualify.
All right, fair enough.
And yet, when I think to the superintendent's report, the socioeconomic needs category went from, was like 1 or 2 to 7 or 8. Yeah. So we know that there's a growth in need. If we're not seeing a corresponding growth in applicants, then you have to wonder what's happening. Where is that delta? Because they exist by some measurement. I'm not sure how that measurement is determined for DESE.
Could be lacking.
The other piece to keep in mind is when you're looking at fees, most of the fees are really the upper grade levels.
Okay.
So with the exception of preschool,
Yeah.
K to 6, there's really almost no fees.
Yeah.
And when you have field trips, as Dr. Kavanaugh stated, the principals, the buildings are very aware of families that may not be able to pay for the field trip. So while they may not apply for financial assistance, they absolutely are covering them using their gift accounts.
Okay.
So those numbers you're not going to see in here. You're seeing the kids apply in here for bus and athletics.
Okay.
So while you're looking at the population as a whole, it's really an upper level secondary population that is really filing for that financial assistance, very much targeting those 2 fees.
Okay.
That's interesting.
So it kind of skews,
Yeah, like,
your intent is, for the whole population.
Right.
This information is skewed kind of not
Middle high
useful.
school.
yeah, to the older kiddo.
Right.
Just to keep in mind.
And there are increased costs in the upper grades that are not part of the fees, but things like laptops, things like if you look at the supply list for like the 8th grade versus the 2nd grade, I would guess the cost is significantly more with the calculators and other things.
Calculators are more expensive than crayons.
And then
There's
dues, like student dues and.
Well, right, you get to high school
Right,
and they
yeah.
have,
The
Yeah.
every
Fee-
year's
athletic dues and
dues.
stuff.
right.
So dues are also part of this as well.
Okay.
Yep. So again,
But
it's a
it's a lot-
secondary problem.
Because just to sort of feel like you're any other kid at the upper levels, it costs money. It just, even if it's not represented in like a fee, it's tough.
Yeah.
It is hard to do.
So we should look at this policy, see what the intent of it was in the first place and I don't know where we got those. I remember reviewing it, but I don't remember where those thresholds came from.
We didn't change, it's almost more procedure.
Was
We
it?
didn't really, when we looked at it, we were looking at like which fees, I think we included like
uniforms.
spirit wear, something,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
something
it
related.
did have things about uniforms and things, but
Yeah.
wherever it came from and why MSBA has it in there
Yeah,
at all,
yeah.
and then see if it fits with what I mean, I don't know if there are other things that we need to consider, but anyway, I think we need to have like a offline Part B policy group, what's going on with this thing, and then we'll come back and say, here's what we found, and then how do we want to, as a committee, address it?
I think so.
I like the plan.
Okay.
I would also add one more thing. Like, based on I work within the town as a social worker, and I will say that there's a lot of people that do not want other people to know that they are struggling financially.
Right.
They feel like whatever we do to try to protect confidentiality and anonymity as much as we can, that maybe it will be incentivizing for people to want to ask for this money. Just because it was very hard to give people the help that they needed because
Always.
of appearances.
Okay. So that brings us then into item D, which is the superintendent's goals draft.
Okay, so these are really just in, as Nancy said, draft shape. And I've been working with different people, and I think you'll probably see that this year, that there are a lot of people around the district who have sort of helped to inform where these goals are going this year. I hope that that's big enough for people to be able to see on the screen. Typically, I have one student achievement goal, and this year I have two. So my first one states that for the past several years, I've incorporated an ELA goal. And, that was huge for me. I wanted to make sure that we were really giving the very best reading instruction that we possibly could and get as many kids reading at grade level as possible. And I think we've done a really nice job of maximizing our literacy and ELA instruction. But now I think it's time to kind of turn our focus to math, and I've been working with Shelley Moran, who is our K-5 math director, and also having conversations with Carla Crisafulli, who's the SML at the high school, and having conversations with Mr. Lefebvre, our new middle school principal, and really thinking about what should really good math instruction look like. At least K2, however the trajectory plays out at the high school level. So in ensuring this goal, I will make sure that we are having our one consistent mean, STAR Math, to measure growth and achievement for all of our kids K to 10. And we've been doing that for a while, and sometimes I think we might get a little bit lax with it, but I want to make sure that we are continuing to do that. And then using other complementary data, assessing math concepts is one of the things that we use in K and 1. Making sure that we have beginning and end of year assessments, that we're taking a look at MCAS, that we're looking at some of our common module assessments, taking a look at formative assessments at each grade level to better define our student learning profiles and our instructional needs. And Shelley's been doing a great job kind of broaching that with our at least K-5 teachers right now. We want to make sure that the number of math instructional minutes is consistent at every grade level, and that's been kind of interesting. So what we will, sometimes find is across, say, third grade classrooms, and I'm certainly not picking on third grade, I'm just choosing them arbitrarily, but when you might have one teacher who says, I really love to teach math, I do 75 minutes a day, and someone else who says I do 60. And so, over time, our students are getting 75 more minutes of math a week, and clearly that turns into hours each month and then days each year. So we want to make sure that the instructional minutes are equitable across grade levels. Several years ago, when I was assistant superintendent, we started a common assessment using a problem-solving template so that as kids get into looking at math problems where they are not just asked to solve a problem, but really think about the wording of the problem. What is it asking me? And what do I know conceptually? And how am I going to articulate that in writing? So we had developed a template for that really spanned the grades from K to 8. We want to make sure that is kind of up and running and being employed consistently across all classrooms K to 8. And one of the things I think that or two of the things I think numbers 6 and 7 kind of go hand in hand, but really making sure that our kids' fact fluency is being taught with consistency, and then looking at our kids who aren't reaching math benchmarks and planning for the necessary interventions and remediation. Number 8 is to, in grade 6, take a look at our curriculum to increase levels of differentiation and to ensure greater depth of study and rigor. And then really evaluate the need to take our 6th graders, and do we need to expose them to more pre-algebra in the curriculum? And how do we make that sort of happen? So that's sort of what I'm thinking about there. If we take a look at some of the product benchmarks, one thing that I think will be important is to take a look at some of our MCAS and STAR scores, because I think when we start working on those constructed responses that will come with the word problem templates and gathering data to support your math analysis that goes with MCAS, I think that those pieces should start to show up, especially in grades 3 and 4. All right, so that's number 1.
I'm super excited about this.
Oh. Thank you.
I think this is an awesome one. Like you said, we've been focusing so much on the literacy piece that it's really, really nice to see a dig down on the math. So I'm excited to see where this goes.
Well, while we were digging down in all of that reading, we also recognized a need to sort of bolster our writing instruction. And I think one of the things that I always believe in with writing is that we've got to use writing in the service of reading, and we've got to use writing in the service of content acquisition. It's really interesting if you're in a classroom with a kid and he says, yes, yes, I've got that science concept. In his head, he really does think he has the science concept. If you ask him to write what that science concept is, it becomes very challenging to retrieve the vocabulary, to truly have the ability to explain. And if you can explain it in writing, then you really do understand the concept. So I think that a writing goal for the district, really K to 10, is important, and I will be working with Jeff and our middle school director of ELA, the elementary ELA director throughout the year on revising the writing curriculum for grades K to 8. And then making sure at K to 8 that our kids are getting writing instruction across genres and with a balance of what we have used over the years, SRSD writing instruction. SRSD is fabulous for having our kids mine for content and then being able to organize that content. But we need to balance that with a focus on discrete skills so that our kids are able to engage in better sentencing, using their voice, pulling out word choice, having a focus on mechanics. So that's that whole piece there, K to 8. What I'd like to make sure that we do when we get to grade 9 at least, and maybe even a little bit at the middle school, is have our writing instruction focus on disciplinary literacy. So we will be writing curricular K to 12, where writing is used in the service of reading, K to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 10, 9 and 10, led by the high school SMLs in English, Science, and Social Studies, and really looking at student growth and achievement and how that lies in the theory that writing in the service of reading will grow their content area abilities. And I know that we talked about disciplinary literacy last year in Mr. Bishop's goals, and this year you will, school improvement plan, this year you'll see disciplinary literacy in both the high school and middle school improvement plans. So I'll be meeting with Mr. Bishop and our new middle school principal, Mr. LaFave, to assess progress on our disciplinary literacy goals. And just as a refresher, what that sort of means is that within each content area, there's a really specific way to communicate. So you write like a scientist, or you think like a mathematician, or you think like a social scientist, or when you're writing in ELA about a text, for example, you'll write in the present tense and the active voice, but when you're in science and you're writing a lab where something has to be so specific that it has to be replicated, our kids should be writing in the past tense and the passive voice. And eventually our kids know what that discourse looks like, and hopefully that will start in dribs and drabs at the middle school but continue through to the high school. I will meet twice annually with the high school SMLs and the middle school PLCs. Mr. Keller and I were fortunate enough to do that with every PLC at the middle school last spring to talk about this goal. And then really creating common writing assessments that will be administered at specific intervals, and from which teachers are going to analyze student learning data and then use the results to drive instruction.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is there a reason why you're stopping in grade 10
I
with your
wanted to
goal?
say
Because those 11th and 12th graders need to continue their writing, believe me.
They do. It stops there because last year we implemented at grade 9, and so this year we'll implement at grade 10. And I know that it might feel very slow, but the kids who got it at 9 will be getting it in 10, will be getting it in 11. Maybe we could push a little.
Well,
I'll
it's
see what
tricky
my friend
because
Mr. Bishop says.
at the high school with electives and different choices, it would be great if it were a way of life.
Yes.
Disciplinary literacy or a way of life across, because once you get into your own elective choices, maybe some of the continuity falls off.
Yes. Yeah, that may be true, and I do agree it should be a way of life. Like our kids as sort of academics should be thinking that way in high school.
So,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
My only other point was I personally struggled with the writing should be used in the service of reading. That I understand it when
To
you
some
say
degree.
it.
Not exclusively. I don't want you to think I mean that exclusively.
No, I think in terms of like cementing and crystallizing the learning, because you have to then be able to articulate it, written. I get that. I do see a lot of people at work and in life struggle with like communication. And so for me, I get where you're going with this goal. I got tripped up in the wording because a lot of what we do is focus on students learning. It's sort of like inwardly focused, becoming better as students all by themselves, and writing is something where you need to prove efficacy when you're trying to communicate to someone else. So I just wanted to, whether it's tone or word choice or, whatever it is, it changes by audience. And I didn't want to lose the communication piece,
Right.
which I don't think you have, but I wasn't knowledgeable of the terminology of writing in the service of reading, so I got tripped up a little.
Yes, and I think that that's where we talk about some of those discrete skills. I don't think we can limit it to, I've mined for information and I'm able to organize it. I think we also have to have voice.
Yeah.
And we have to understand sort of sentencing and tone, and how does sentencing work in a science genre versus in an ELA genre, for example.
Yeah.
I like that you have technical writing on there because that is a skill that is hard, right? So I'm glad that these kids are learning that now. It'll
Yes,
be
and I-
very useful for when they're trying to write an email. Right, that you can understand. Like usually you get way too much. I'm like, what is the point? I wish somebody knew technical writing here.
And you're right that it has to be explicitly taught.
Yeah.
And we can't just expect our kids who are proficient writers in grade 6 to sort of, by osmosis, pick up what we mean by that. Some will,
Yeah.
but many won't.
Yeah.
So I have two things. One is, the first one is, I never loved technical writing and stuff like that. I was forced to do it. So it's good to see that there's an entire structure around the idea of this literacy. At MIT when I was there, in order to graduate MIT, I had to take an English class specifically focused on peer journal writing, right? And I could not graduate without that class in a completely technical university, right? So there is a real need for that. But my second point is when I look at the math, there's the remediation. When we talked about the literature and the reading before, there was the focus on dyslexia and things like that. I would love to see a line item here for like dysgraphia or issues with writing, like something that talks about dealing with the children who actually have problems putting words to paper, right? I would love to see like one line in here for that.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. And just so you are also aware, the SRSD program that we use, which is self-regulated strategy development, really is something that came about for students on IEPs as long ago as the 70s. And what they started to realize was that it was so good for students that a lot of school districts have put it in for all students. But I understand what you're saying. It doesn't discount the fact that we do have some kids who have dysgraphia or who have like almost that sort of like writing aversion, right? Like,
Yeah.
how are we dealing with those kids?
I mean, my oldest son, so the reason this one like really touches with me is my oldest son has ligament problems. Like he had to do a ton of OT to be comfortable physically writing. And that translated to him typing because when you're younger, you're writing a bunch, right? So he kind of got all the kind of bad habits from trying to not physically write. And so when it translated to the computer, it took a long time for him to actually separate out things the way he should, capitalize things the way he should, because he spent so long just trying to shortcut writing, And so, so I think that's the other reason why this is, very kind of important key to me is, I don't want to see those students kind of not having a focus on them.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, if we have some of our, especially design instruction people, keeping as much data as we would like, I mean, it really is a nice way to weave that into the school.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, my third goal, and this stems from what kind of happened this past year. We have a new director of social emotional learning. We've had Dr. Zaleski, who has been doing a lot of work really with our guidance department. We know guidance is a gen ed function, and she's the Director of Student Services, so how that happened, we're not really sure. And then we also have Jen Suga, who is the Director of English Language Acquisition, Equity, and Access. And what we started to see, like with the more research we did, is that when we talk about SEL, we talk about equity-based or equity approaches to SEL. And then we really thought that the work of the three of these people needs to sort of merge, because it was hard to kind of define boundaries. It was hard to understand the intersections of the work. And so I think that now it's really important that we take a look at those things, almost as if they have to live under one umbrella, but through multiple departments. So one of the things that I think is a key starting place is to work with the Director of English Language Acquisition, Equity, and Access and our Social Emotional Learning Director to create some kind of document shared district-wide that outlines the intersection of those important areas of growth for us. Review frequently with admin and teachers the equity-aligned social emotional learning competencies, as well as definitions for culturally responsive practices. When we get together with the admin folks next week, we do have someone coming from Blackprint who's going to talk to us about what is culturally proficient practice. And it is different from SEL, but the two of them are so intertwined, inextricably bound, that I think we have to define that for our people. Help our teachers and administrators understand the HSA, which is that survey that we had done last spring. It's the asset-based student data survey. So we have all of that HSA data now for our kids who are in grades 7 to 12. And so we'll be using some of that data to take a look at the districts. And I know we're saying 7 to 12, but really those are the kids that are, the kids who have left Marathon and Elmwood and Hopkins and what ends up happening. And we can look at the HSA data by individual student. We can look at it in the aggregate, but we can also look at it by demographic breakout, which is what we'll be doing next week. We will be sharing very widely this year so that no one can come to school committee and say, I've never seen that form you're talking about. But it would be nice for our kids to be able to understand what is our protocol and how do I acknowledge or report or whatever an incident of hate or bias. We will be in our third year with Blackprint Consulting, working on culturally proficient leadership through DESE. And we'll begin the work of ensuring that there are culturally proficient practices in all of our classrooms. And so one of the things that will happen next week is, we even just have things that say, this is what it looks like, this is what it doesn't look like. So the competencies are really observable for our principals who are going into classrooms. We'll use data to inform the value and need to integrate equity-based SEL competencies into the curriculum and lesson design. So how are kids going to grow in their self-regulation, social interaction, interpersonal communication, conflict resolution, and problem solving, and civic responsibility and service. Offer sustained and scalable professional learning to ensure that all adult learners understand and apply key principles of cultural proficiency and social emotional learning, and that really speaks to our adult readiness. Some people are really good at this stuff, and some people need a lot of kind of guidance to get them there. We have been accepted into a trial program between Yale University, DESE, and the Elmwood School, and we will also be continuing all of our K-5 PBIS work there. The Yale work at Elmwood will be really getting focused on the observable competencies for SEL, but we're just starting that in grades 2 and 3. We'll be training our middle school and high school admin and our instructional leaders and counselors in restorative practices. That should be coming up before school gets back. Committing to parent, family, and community outreach, enlisting the support of stakeholder groups in the district and school community, working with the Director of Student Services, the Director of, I'll call her Equity and Access, to grow CPAC and LPAC. I think last year this was part of this same goal, and we made, I thought, greater strides than we ever have in growing those programs. So I'm really so proud of Jen Suker and Karen Zaleski for that, and work with HR to continue to diversify our workforce in all of our Hopkinton public school roles. Moving on to number 4. as always, addressing enrollment growth. Hopefully, this is going to be the year where all of this really comes to fruition. I know we've been talking about it a lot, but really taking a look at our expansion throughout the district so that we are looking at a written 3 to 5 year plan and working very closely with the MSBA and the ESBC too on the Hopkinton Elmwood School project. So we all know that whatever we decide with the Elmwood project, whether it's a 2-3 school or a 2-3-4 school, those are the two things that the MSBA is willing to sponsor at this point in time. It's going to have a domino effect. And over the next several months, Mrs. Carver and I will be working on, what does an educational plan look like for a 2-3 or a 2-3-4 school? But I think that we also have to make decisions as a district to think about what will an educational plan look like for all of the grades that come after that. Marathon is pretty settled where it is, and then we'll have either a 2-3 or 2-3-4. But what does that mean in terms of the domino effect, in terms of physical plants, as well as academic programming for all of the grades that follow that? So I think that's a huge undertaking, and I think it's going to happen in a relatively short period of time. I think that as you look at this, one of the things that we were talking with the MSBA about just very recently is that the deadlines for feasibility come up pretty quickly, and they will be looking for this committee to sort of make its recommendation or endorsement anyway by early March.
Do you have a target date? It is, I'm just thinking of any target date for when to start some of these forums and kind of the campus planning group that's working, I know, in conjunction with the ESBC.
Yes. So Susan, you can feel free to chime in on this. We looked through the state statutes, and we also had conversations with the MSBA and our legal counsel, because there is a big question about to what extent is our designer responsible for helping us to understand that domino effect? And so, you get to this place where in terms of things like, it's our belief that in terms of things like square footage of the Hopkins School, should you remove grade 4 and pick up grade 6 and put them in there, what does the square footage need look like? And where would you get that square footage? When you close Elmwood, would you add the new Elmwood modulars that would no longer be needed there and attach them to the Hopkins School? But that only gets you 4 classrooms. It doesn't get you a larger cafeteria, and it doesn't get you a common space for the entire school to gather, if that would be something that programmatically you deemed necessary. So we are in the process really now of kind of negotiating that with our designer, trying to make those decisions.
Yeah, and there are things that legally they are bound within this feasibility agreement to do. So, we're, as part of the negotiation, just really clarifying our scope with that designer. So, according to the, the feasibility, they have to show all those impacts depending on all the different options that they put forward. So we will get most of what we're looking for just using the MSBA feasibility agreement.
So I guess that is important information, but what I actually was getting more towards was kind of the community piece of it, because I do think if we're looking at moving potentially from a 2-3 to a 2-3-4 school, we really need to get the community involved well ahead of, if we as a group need to make a decision in February, March, I would want to really know where the community is on that, and kind of to bring them along from, earliest possible dates, but I don't know when for you that would kind of feasibly with everything else we have going on.
Right. And the interesting thing is that that's not work that the superintendent alone drives. You have to take your designer and you have to take your ESBC too, and those are the people who really, obviously with school committee input, with superintendent input, but those are the people who sort of drive that work. And we have an ESBC 2 meeting tomorrow night, and I think that has to be the messaging from me to that committee, is that we need to start having dates in place, because I don't think you can say to the community, oh, by the way, next week we're happy to have a forum. People need to have an understanding of when these things are going to come about and what kinds of questions are going to be posed to them.
And just to build on that, Because if you go back to your goals, which I think was the
Yes.
topic, I mean,
Yeah,
I think
sorry.
when I looked at the goals and saw the vote, the date, and then backpedaled to your, I think you want to have a plan drafted by February 1st. If I saw that correctly, February anyway, February 1st, yeah. So in order for you to have a plan drafted by February 1st that addresses the concerns and takes into account the community's questions, issues, whatnot, in my opinion, we need to start in September, or already, but here we are, September, and have, I mean, I would think we would have a series of monthly, maybe, conversations that we schedule, that we have, that, you know, that we can get at this. Because while the MSBA may say sixth graders are yay tall and need this square footage per student, and they're not going to say, hey, this is where you're going to put your robotics room for sixth graders. Like, that's a programming issue, and that it's a huge conversation that it's going to be hard for me to vote on a plan knowing that, like, feeling like the tail's going to wag the dog, because there are all these other grades that are coming. So even when I look at, like, the votes we take this year, like, come October, I think, Susan, and maybe it's November, I'm kind of fingers crossed it's November, but I think in October we vote the capital plan. And so even like how we vote this year's capital plan, we need to see that in the context of projections for the future. Like, I think, so that comes up in the fall, that's quick. And then, you know, we need to vote the budget in January. So in order to be in a position to do this work, I'm hoping that you guys can articulate to the ESBC too that we need to have a set of community forums scheduled, even if we don't know exactly what we're going to do. Something that we can say to the community, you know, on the third Thursday of every, or third Wednesday or whatever, we're going to have a session leading, like, now through January, now through even December. You know, something that we can put in place so we can tackle these issues and be in a place to review your preferred option in December so that you can then write your plan. Like, there's a lot there.
Yes,
and,
there
and
is.
and we also have money that we have, I think, folded into this process for the campus planning initiative that we voted 2-3 years ago now, that should complement the MSBCA. I'm adding the letters. Am I adding letters? Anyway,
Combining two.
ESBC2 or whatever. That money should complement it to help us get the answers that we need for the bigger picture. You know, it's a whole big puzzle.
Yes, because
And-
if you take your example of, do you want robotics
Right.
in the sixth grade?
Yeah.
That's not only a programming decision, but it's also a space decision.
Yeah, absolutely.
And someone's going to have to tell you, how much does that space cost, and how much does that program cost?
Absolutely.
So that's what's going to drive decision-making, I think, you know, as you have that domino effect.
Exactly.
And to have a sense of where the community, how the community would feel about putting the sixth grade in a different building, or putting the
Right.
fourth grade in a different, whatever the outcome of that would be. We need to have that lens as we go into that.
And where does ninth grade go? And, like,
So
you know,
many
I mean,
things.
this-
I mean, but it's
Yeah.
not even a different building, right? So if we say 2, 3, 4, and then we say, oh, well, I mean, I'm not saying we will, but we say like Hopkins is now going to be 5, 6. Well, 6 was included with middle school type curriculum, and 5th was included with Hopkins type curriculum. And now we're putting them both in the same building. Does that mean 6th is no longer getting middle school type curriculum, which may upset somebody, you know? Or does that mean 5th grade is now going to get like a slightly more mature sort of movement about the building, right? Like, those types of questions are huge questions too, and they do affect parents, right?
And their willingness to support
Correct.
whatever the Elmwood solution turns out to be is really going to hinge on their belief in the vision that we put forward
Yeah.
for the whole.
Yes.
And we can maybe make the February date, but I'm very, very hesitant to relinquish all management of the communications for this entire puzzle to
Yes,
one
please.
organization. Like, I don't know if we need like a subcommittee to help with this, or if we need additional liaison support. Like, I'm really not sure, but we've been waiting and waiting, and I feel like even with the designer hopefully signed, sealed, and delivered by the end of the week, it's mid-August. You know, it's tough.
I will say that, and I'm trying to find the calendar, but the plan is to have at least 2 community forums a month, September, October, November,
Fabulous.
and December.
That's great. Thank you.
And it will address different avenues
Topics, yeah.
along the way.
Okay.
Yep.
I believe I've derailed the goal conversation. I apologize, not at all.
Saying that's an important goal.
Yeah, this may be the most important goal that we deal with all year, sure.
I like it.
All right. And then the last one again is to kind of go back to the administrative team to improve communication, unity, and care for one another. You'll remember that when we had our workshop, you did talk about that whole idea of love and statistics, and I think that that's, I met with some members of the admin team throughout the spring to talk about what will our admin retreat look like. And one of the things that they kept saying over and over again is that we're going back into something now that's supposed to be normal, but we know it's not normal. It's just sort of a new way of kind of doing school post-pandemic, and there's still trauma for teachers, there's still trauma for kids, but we're ready to go back and get back at the work. We just have to acknowledge where are we and what does that look like. And I think showing people statistics is really helpful so that they have an understanding of, like the HSA survey will help them understand where kids are emotionally. And, some of the academic pieces will help them. But I also think that we need to be able to say, like, where am I as an educator, and where are my teachers, and what do I need at my core to be able to help my teachers to be able to help my kids. So that's really kind of the basis for that goal. And I know that, we want that to trickle down into classrooms, and I don't necessarily know how I measure that, but I'm kind of hoping that the work that we're doing and just validating where we are and our need to be a team over and over and over again is going to get us there. A lot of the things that Jeff and I have been talking about is really giving our building principals and directors things that are tangible that they can take with them right away to just get in there and work with the teachers. Not sort of stuff that's very philosophical, but stuff that is like boots on the ground. Get your hands dirty stuff.
Only 5? That's a good one. I think that's huge too, is giving something that folks can use when they leave a workshop.
Yeah.
Teachers appreciate that. Quite a bit.
I think that the strategic plan that you guys work together on will be unifying. I mean, because it seems like you were tackling the vision, the mission, and sort of a restatement of purpose. I mean, for me, I'm kind of goal-oriented, so for me personally, a restatement of purpose is it's reinvigorating and important, especially as we're coming off of this strange pandemic where, the nature of teaching and learning, it was so turned upside down that I think sometimes kids even forget why they go to school. I think kids are like, what am I doing here? And we see in our kids a huge calling, a sense of purpose. We see kids wanting to compost. We see them wanting to 100 plus kids doing science fair, trying to solve big problems. We see lots of kids doing robotics, trying to figure stuff out, and they feel the need for purpose. And I think the more we can harness common purpose and through their vision or mission and all that in conjunction with the other work you're doing, it seems like it will help everybody line up. So
Kids do need to feel a little bit of success. It's like a little drug for them, and then they keep going. And they don't have to feel the same success across the board. They have to feel their success. So.
I think you were talking about measurable in this, and my company has a human capital piece, and so when we think about our goals, we have to think about SMART goals and human capital, which is really, really hard. But what we do is things like, number of meetings, like if you're going to touch base, how many wellness sort of one-on-one type meetings do you have with people? So that's measurable. It's, still a little loose because you're talking about, touch points, but you can at least say you have met monthly with, your team or individuals in your team separately. abilities to kind of get their points across or present or whatever. So if you have like admin group meetings, are everybody's voices being heard during these meetings? Like if you have any kind of presentation piece or any type of expertise, maybe you include some kind of like having individual admin members talk about whatever their expertise is to the group as a whole to once again create camaraderie, and then that can also be measured, right? Like they got to present to the entire team. And I don't know what you're doing or what you're not, but I'm just trying to kind of throw out ideas of things that are measurable while still being sort of intangible in some ways, right?
Right.
Because that is really hard and it is really important, right?
The qualitative stuff, though, is equally important. You can walk away from the year and just ask the buildings, what was the feel? And it's not a measurement, but if you get a statement, which a narrative, which is maybe sometimes even more valuable than the number. So I think this is one of those qualitative ones that are different but equal in importance. Yeah. And I love that you're forever immortalized in the bottom.
Oh,
I know you're
telling you,
lovely.
Holly, we're
It's great.
My husband will be very happy. He doesn't appreciate it as much as I think this board does.
He'll learn. Holly.
Yeah, he's got to learn.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
It
this is
amazes me every year, just looking, this is a draft, I know, but it feels like so much more than a draft, just how much goes into it, so thank you.
Your love for this school district is very clear in all of these goals. I think that it makes me happy to read.
All right, so we are a little bit off schedule tonight, but I think all worthwhile conversations. Are there any future agenda items that people want to throw out that we don't already have on our little list? You can always also email. All right, so that brings us into items by consensus.
Okay, as superintendent, I recommend the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Leah, a second by Jen. All those in favor?
Aye.
And so moved. And then if there's someone who would like to make a motion to adjourn.
Sure. I move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And it is unanimous. We are adjourned at 9:05. Thank you all for tuning in. And our next regular meeting will be on August 22nd. Certainly before then, I'm hoping that people will attend the special town meeting on the 18th at 7 p.m. at the High School Athletic Center. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of the summer.
Thank you.